Oh, hi there. Welcome to Sue Talk again. I am just listening to some music, getting in the mood here, and I was looking at some pictures. This is a picture of my grandparents. They were married in the 1920s. Notice the flapper get up here, and little did they ever think they'd be on a YouTube video, I'm sure. Well, today we're going to talk about the different chapters and particularly the characters in those chapters. The main character, Nick, we talked about last time, and he is our narrator, we said, and he's the one who gets to meet all the different other characters and tell us about them. And he's told us how trustworthy he is. So, of course, we're going to trust him. And I think at the very beginning, he has a quote where he tells us that his dad told him that you aren't as privileged as everybody else, and you should give everybody a chance. Or, excuse me, you're more privileged than everybody else, and you should give other people a chance and be a good listener. So Nick is a good listener, and we trust him. And Nick is also kind of a wannabe rich guy. He's from Minneapolis, Minnesota, or around there, St. Paul, and he's gone to college, to Yale, and then he goes back to Minnesota and decides he wants to learn the bond business. So, which is Wall Street, and he wants to make lots of money, like most other Americans do, because that's the American dream. You get lots of money and you can get whatever you want, right? And you're really happy after that, right? Well, we'll talk about that more later. The first person Nick meets is Tom Buchanan. Tom Buchanan is married to Daisy, who is Nick's cousin. And Tom is described as a big football player, hulky guy. I think Fitzgerald describes him as having a cruel body. Now, anybody who has a cruel body isn't going to be probably our nicest character. And Tom also has some other problems. We'll talk about it in a minute. I'm going to show you he's known as the polo player. So I have a little horse here. Well, we'll pretend that isn't there. It's a unicorn, actually. And here's Tom, his straw-haired guy, kind of a big burly guy, and he's playing polo. See? I know you love my visual aids. Okay. Now we meet Tom then, and he's straw-haired, a big guy, and he's also described as supercilious, and we talked about that last time, that being super stupid, because people who are supercilious think they're super better than everybody else, and Tom is that. He's your standard white privileged guy, and he's married to Daisy, and Daisy, when Tom brings Nick into the room, she and another woman are lying on some couches because it's a hot day and they're relaxing, and they probably have the big cigarettes in their, the holder in their hands, and they're just sitting there kicking back, and they make Nick come to them. They don't get up and go greet him. He has to go to them. He goes over to Daisy and he kisses her hand, and she's like, "Oh, Nick, it's so nice to see you." And her voice goes up and down, and she flirts, and there's nothing between them, but she's very flirtatious because that's just how Daisy is. And you should know that her name is very symbolic. I was looking through my handy dandy flower catalog here and found some pictures of some daisies. Look at that, white on the outside, yellow in the middle, and probably down the road we'll talk about that a little more, but if you can put it together before then, good for you. One thing that came to mind to me is if you've pictured a daisy, I know it's too early for daisies to be blooming now, but a daisy in the wind, like yesterday or today, let's say the daisies were blooming. What's that daisy going to do in the wind? In fact, the wind's blowing against my window here now. Okay, the daisy's going to go. It's going to go back and forth in the wind, isn't it? It's not like a rose that's got a sturdier stem. It's much more fickle, and it's going to blow in the wind. And that's like our Daisy Buchanan does. She blows in the wind, and whatever mood suits her, and she goes this way and that way. And you can't really count on Daisy. Okay, she's pretty to look at. She's, got interesting things about her, but you can't count on her. She's going to blow in the wind. Tom was originally from Chicago, we find out, and Daisy is from Louisville, Kentucky. She's a Southern belle. Now, her friend, the other woman in the room, Jordan Baker, is also from Louisville, and they knew each other when they were younger, and Daisy's a little bit older, and Jordan looks up to her, and therefore Jordan's a little bit more of a free spirit. She's a golf pro, okay? So she goes out and plays golf and gets paid some money, and Tom thinks this is terrible. What are they doing letting a woman like that run around the world like that? He's very sexist and racist too. We're going to find out. So we have Jordan sitting there, and I love how Fitzgerald describes her. She's sitting there, and he said it looked like she was balancing something on her chin. Her chin was in the air. And if her chin's in the air, that also puts her nose in the air. So we know she as well is supercilious and thinks she's better than everybody else and has an air about her. And she makes Nick come over to her too. And in fact, she can barely turn her head to look at him. He felt like he was disturbing her. So they both have airs about them. And they're both Southern belles. And they've had everything they want, and they're spoiled rotten. And they're old money. Hopefully I said that. Now, while they're having dinner, something else we should talk about is the phone rings. Okay, there's a phone ring. No, I can't. I don't have a phone. My phone would sound different than theirs did that anyway. But phone rings, and somebody probably answers it and calls Tom in. Oh, it's for you, Tom. And then Daisy follows him in. So Jordan and Nick are left out on the veranda after dinner. And Jordan whispers to Nick, "You know who that is, don't you?" Nick says, "Oh, who is it?" Jordan says, "That's his sweetie." And Nick says, "What?" And Jordan says, "He's got a girl in New York." And Nick goes, "Oh, he does he?" So anyway, Tom's a cheater. And like I said, he's sexist, and he talks about reading that book by Godard, okay? And that in that book, he talks about how he's worried about how the white race is going to be gone and all the colored people are going to take over. And he's extremely racist as well. So sexist, racist, a bully. Tom isn't a nice guy. So Nick goes home, and when he goes home at the end of chapter 1, and he goes home to West Egg. Okay, East Egg is the fancier part of town. Fancier of the eggs anyway. He goes to East Egg, Daisy and Tom live at East Egg, the old money part of town that looks down on West Egg, the new part. And think of that as our country. The older part of our country is the East, and the newer part's the West. So that's how it is with the eggs. So when Nick goes home, he looks over at his neighbor's house. Now, Nick's got this it used to be like a little shack or a little guest house or something for this big old mansion. Okay, that a new mansion, new money. And Jay Gatsby lives there. And Nick hasn't met him yet, but when he looks over, there's Gatsby with his arms outstretched over the water or toward the other side of the bay, and he's looking at something. And it's a little light, and it's a specific color. And that brings me to the point of each of these chapters has their particular colors. Now, you would think the symbol for chapter 1 might be green since that little light is green. But if you think back over chapter 1, it might be white. The white dresses, Daisy's a white Daisy, the white supremacy, the clean outer whitewashed look of them on East Egg. So let's go with white. That brings us to chapter 2. In chapter 2, we're introduced to a new part of this area of New York, and it's called the Ash Heaps. And it's Astoria is the name of the little town, and that's where the bridge goes over into Manhattan. So it's just before you cross over. And these ash heaps are where they all dump the ashes. You know, back then they would have had coal and fireplaces and all that kind of stuff to burn things, and everything would have been fueled by combustible materials, and this is where they dump the ashes. It's like the dump, the city dump. And Tom gets it in his head that, you know, I should introduce my mistress to Nick. Why he thinks that, I don't know. But anyway, he does. And they stop at this little gas station that belongs to the Wilsons. We have George and we have Myrtle. And if you haven't read carefully over the descriptions of these two characters, you should, because they are stellar. They really are. Look at how Fitzgerald describes Myrtle coming down the steps, okay? She carries her surplus flesh sensuously, like some women can. And he goes on to describe her. And when she comes down, she walks through her husband and shakes hands with Tom. Okay, this tells us so much, okay? Myrtle, okay, is hotsy-totsy. And Tom is attracted to her. And she walks through her husband, so she doesn't care about her husband. And George is just this nice, hard-working guy who fixes cars and fills them up with gas and all this. And here his wife is cheating on him. So Tom and Nick leave to go to the city. And Tom had told Myrtle, you know, why don't you come into the city too? So she does. And she tells George that she's going to see her sister. But she's not. She's going to see Tom. And on the way, Tom buys her a puppy and all that good stuff. When they get to their apartment in the city, they have a party. And everybody gets drunk. And even Nick. He said it's the second time in his life, I believe, he's gotten drunk. So at this party, lots of stuff takes place. But to me, the most important thing that takes place, I want you to notice the change in Myrtle from when she was in the garage to when she's in the apartment in the city. She puts on this different dress. She becomes a whole different person. Okay, she is Tom's mistress. And by putting on this fancy dress and being in this fancy apartment, she pretends she has money. She feels like she's got money. And her whole personality changes. She starts ordering people around. Now remember, she's a garage mechanic's wife. And she says, oh, can you go do this? And oh, those little people, they did this for me. She has this whole attitude that she takes on simply because she changed her dress and she's in a different place. And it's the idea that she has money, even though she doesn't. I think the transformation of Myrtle is really interesting. Okay. And let's see. Oh, on the way to the city, too, I didn't mention this. So not only do colors almost become characters, there's a billboard in this book. The billboard with Dr. T.J. Uckelberg and the big glasses on it. That's a character as well. So I don't want to tell you too much about that, but that big billboard is in the ash heaps. Right above, coming right out of the ashes, and it's looking all over this little town, over the Wilson's gas station. So just pay attention to that. And think of what color is represented, at least at the beginning of this chapter. If you read the first few paragraphs, everything is gray. And this is where the poor people live, okay? The hardworking people, the guys shoveling ashes, and the Mr. Wilson and Myrtle, who are hardworking people that never, well, Myrtle isn't that hardworking, but George is. And they're the poor people. And notice their color is gray. Okay, there's like no hope. And white was the color of Easted. So the party goes on and you watch Myrtle change. I told you to do that. Just the whole idea of her changes. And toward the end of the party, there are some other things that happen too. But toward the end of the party, Myrtle does something. She says Daisy's name. She says, Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. I'll say it whenever I want. Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. Well, Tom had told her not to say it, and she says it anyway. So what does Tom do? But sorry if that scared you. But he smacks her one and breaks her nose. I'm not going to act that part out for you. Anyway, she's got a broken nose. And she's standing there crying, and he loves her up, and oh, it's gonna be okay. Just like a very abusive guy. He does that, and then he apologizes for it, but you can't trust Tom either because he's a cheater. At the end of the party, after Tom, and why does Tom smack Daisy in the nose? I want you to think about that. Just because she says Daisy. So what? She says, why isn't she supposed to say Daisy? She's saying it because she's jealous of Daisy. But why does Tom smack her because she says Daisy? Why don't you give that some thought? Is Tom going to leave Daisy for Myrtle? Be thinking about that. After the party, and there were some other people there too. They're kind of some minor characters. Myrtle's sisters there, Catherine, and the McKees are there. But after the party, Nick is outside, and I found this kind of interesting. He's looking up at the lights up above, and he says, now I'm outside looking in, and I know kind of what it's like in there. Remember I told you he's kind of an outsider in this world of all this money, and he's taking it all in because he wants to be rich? And now he's gotten a glimpse into it. And he's going to be learning more and more about it. Well, that's pretty much chapters 1 and 2. I hope you enjoyed them. And what I would like you to do for next time, and this is real interesting, and I think it tells a lot about a person. I want you to pretend that you've won the lottery. You have just won $10 million. And I want you to think about what you do with that $10 million. Think about it. You have got $10 million. You've become newly rich. Actually, you could probably go higher than that. 10 million is much anymore when they're talking about the national debt being in the trillions. And the top 1% having billions. I suppose I'll give you 50 million, okay? You can have $50 million. Figure out what you might do with $50 million. After you do that, I want you to stop and think, would that change who I am? Would I be a different person if I had $50 million? Would I have the same friends? Would they treat me the same, or would they treat me differently? If we went out to lunch, would I buy lunch? Would they expect me to buy lunch, or would I make them buy their own lunch? What about family members? They'd all want some money, probably. What family members would you give money to? How is this money going to change your life and maybe change you? Kind of like, how Myrtle changed even with the idea of having money just by putting on a fancy dress? Think about it. Join me next time for Sue Talk. Ta-ta.